Serena Vale had never prayed to be chosen. While the other women in the great hall whispered prayers beneath their breath and smoothed their dresses with nervous hands, Serena stood still. She kept her eyes forward, and her breathing even. The ceremonial candles burned all around them, casting long shadows across the black stone walls. The air smelled of cedar and something older, something that belonged to ancient rituals and unspoken rules. She had been brought here because the pack required it. Every woman of age was expected to attend the blood moon ceremony. To refuse the invitation itself was its own kind of exile. So she had come, dressed in white, like the rest of them, and she had told herself it would not come to her. It never came to women like her. Serena was not a wolf. She had been adopted into the pack as an infant by a woman named Mara, a kind and quiet elder who had raised her with warmth and care. But no matter how many years passed, the pack never fully forgot what Serena was: human, unmarked, other. So she stood at the end of the line and told herself she was invisible. She was wrong. King Dorian Blackthorn entered the hall without announcement. He did not need one. The room changed when he walked in, the way a room changes when a storm arrives. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark ceremonial robes, his expression composed in the way of someone who had never once doubted his right to be exactly where he was. He walked the line slowly. Most of the women did not breathe as he passed them. Some trembled visibly. A few smiled with desperate hope. Dorian looked at each one with the same calm, assessing expression, as though he were making a calculation rather than a choice. He stopped in front of Serena. She had not expected it. For one unguarded moment, her composure cracked. Then she gathered it back and met his eyes. He studied her for a long moment, then he reached for her wrist. Serena stepped back. The sound that followed was not a gasp. It was the absence of sound, total and immediate, as though the room itself could not process what had just happened. Every candle flame seemed to freeze. Every breath in the hall stopped at once. Dorian's hand remained extended in the air for a moment. He looked at her, the way someone looks at a thing that has behaved against its nature. A river flowing uphill, a stone falling sideways. Serena's voice was quiet but clear. She told him she declined. She did not say it with anger. She did not say it with fear. She said it the way a person states a fact they have long since made peace with. She did not belong to anyone she had not chosen. She was sorry if that inconvenienced him. She was not sorry for saying it. The silence broke. Voices erupted around her. Elder Voss, the council spokesman, stepped forward immediately, his face pale with fury. He said words like protocol, and law, and consequence. Dorian lowered his hand. His expression had not become angry. It had become something colder than anger, something that looked like the decision being made behind his eyes. He turned and walked away. Mara found Serena's hand in the chaos and held it tightly. Her fingers were shaking. The exile decree was read before dawn. Ancient law was clear. Dorian could not force a bond. But in refusing the Alpha King, Serena had, by the letter of pack law, refused the protection of all wolfkind. She was declared unmarked. She was given 1 hour. Mara wept and could not stop weeping, but she did not argue with the council. Serena understood. To argue was to share the exile. She could not ask that of her mother. She packed only what she could carry: a wool coat, a small knife, a journal she had kept since she was 12. She walked out of the gates as the sun was beginning to rise, and she did not look back, because she knew that if she looked back, she might not keep walking. The forest beyond the pack's territory was dense and cold. Serena walked for most of the day, following the old paths she had studied in the archive records, the ones that mapped the space between the wolf territories and the lands beyond. She did not have a destination. She had a direction, and that was enough for now. By the second day, the trees changed. They thinned at first, then grew taller and stranger, their bark carrying a reddish warmth like something beneath the surface was quietly burning. The air was warmer here, drier. The light shifted to something amber-tinted, even though the sky was overcast. She was in Ember Court territory. She had heard stories about the fire wielders her whole life, proud, dangerous, ancient enemies of the wolf packs, in ways that had more to do with politics than blood. The stories painted them as ruthless and cold beneath the warmth of their power. Serena was exhausted. Her feet were sore, and she had eaten the last of her food that morning. She told herself the stories were likely exaggerated. She told herself this because the alternative was turning back, and there was nothing to turn back to. She collapsed near a river at the border of their inner territory. She did not mean to. Her legs simply stopped cooperating. She was still conscious when she heard the horse. The man who dismounted was not what the stories had prepared her for. He was not dramatic or frightening. He was tall, with dark hair and a composed face, dressed in simple riding clothes with no insignia that she could see. He knelt beside her, checked that she was breathing, and asked in a calm, unhurried voice if she was injured. She told him she was fine. Then she tried to stand and could not. He helped her onto his horse without making a large event of it. She asked where he was taking her. He said somewhere warm, with food. She asked if she was a prisoner. He said no. She told him she had heard that before. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that was a fair thing to say, and he understood why she would be cautious. She decided to trust him a little further, mostly because she had no real choice. The Ember Court Palace was built from amber stone that caught the light and held it, so that the building seemed to glow from the inside. Fires burned in long iron fixtures along every corridor, flames that moved without wind and needed no wood. Serena was given a room with a deep hearth, and a bed piled with wool blankets, and a meal brought on a plain tray by a quiet servant who asked no questions. She ate everything on the tray, and slept for 12 hours. When she woke, she found out who the man on the horse was. His name was Calum Ashvale. He was the king of the Ember Court. He had not told her this at the river, and she felt briefly foolish for not recognizing him. Then she felt irritated at herself for feeling foolish, because she had been half unconscious at the time, and he had been wearing plain riding clothes. She asked a servant where the archive was. The servant blinked at her. She explained that she wanted to work. She was not going to sit in a room and be kept. She was trained in historical records and treaty documentation, and she would rather be useful than idle. The servant brought her to a long, warm room lined floor to ceiling, with bound records and old maps. Serena spent the rest of the day there, organizing what had clearly not been touched in some time. Calum found her there the following morning. He stood in the doorway for a moment before he spoke, taking in the reorganized shelves with an expression she could not quite read. Then he said good morning and asked how she had slept. She told him well, and thanked him for the room and the meal. Then she asked him, directly, what the terms of her stay were. She preferred to know what was expected of her. He said there were no terms. She was a guest. She could leave whenever she chose. She asked why he had helped her. He said that she had been alone on the border of his territory with no mark and no allegiance, which meant technically, no law prevented him from assisting her. She had clearly needed assistance. The decision had not been complicated. She studied him. He held her gaze without discomfort. She went back to the archive records. He left her to it. But he returned the next morning, and the one after that. They talked first about the records she was sorting, old border agreements from 3 centuries back that had been misfiled and cross-referenced incorrectly. Then they talked about the history behind those agreements, the political pressures that had shaped them. Then, slowly, over many mornings in that warm room surrounded by old paper, they began to talk about other things. She told him what had happened at the blood moon ceremony. She kept her voice matter-of-fact, the way she always did when speaking about things that had cost her something. He listened without interrupting. He did not offer her sympathy or outrage. He simply listened, and then he said that she had been very brave. She told him it had not felt like bravery. It had felt like the only thing she could do and still remain herself. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he understood that feeling precisely. He told her that in the Ember Court, no ruler could take a consort by decree or by tradition alone. Their law required a choice made freely by both people, without pressure and without condition. If no such person was found, the ruler governed alone. She asked how long he had governed alone. He said 11 years. She looked at him more carefully after that, at the composed face and the careful words, and the way he sat in silence without restlessness, as though he had made a long peace with his own company. She recognized something in it. She was familiar with making peace with your own company. 3 weeks into her stay, everything changed. A courier arrived from the Wolf territories with a formal letter. Dorian was demanding her return. He framed it not as a personal matter, but as a procedural one, citing inter-kingdom accords about the status of exiles. He argued that an unmarked exile from a wolf pack remained under the jurisdiction of their last lawful sovereign until formally transferred or deceased. Calum showed her the letter himself. He did not soften the language. He told her she had options. He had contacts in a third kingdom, far from both their territories, where she could be sheltered safely and quietly. He would handle the diplomatic response. She would be protected. She asked why he would take on that difficulty for her. He set the letter down on the archive table and looked at her for a moment before he answered. He said that she was the first person in 11 years who had spoken to him without wanting something from the conversation. That she had walked into his archive and asked about treaty law before she had ever asked about her own situation. That she treated him like a person rather than a position. He stopped before he said more, but he had already said enough. She told him she was not going to a third kingdom. He looked at her carefully. She told him she had read every inter-kingdom accord in that archive twice over. Dorian's argument had a weakness, and she intended to be in the room when someone pointed it out. Calum arranged a formal summit on neutral ground 3 days later. It was held in a stone hall halfway between both territories, filled with council representatives from 4 kingdoms. Serena was not on the guest list. She attended anyway. She arrived quietly and stood near the back until Dorian began his argument. He was persuasive, she admitted. He spoke with authority and used precise legal language. The council members were nodding along. Serena walked to the front of the room. The room stopped. She addressed the council calmly. She said that the argument they had just heard rested on Article 9 of the Inter-Kingdom Accord. But Article 9 had a conditional clause that Dorian had not mentioned, one that required the original sovereign to have acted within the laws of the accord themselves at the time of exile. She cited the article number. She cited the subsection. She cited the year it had been amended and the council that had signed the amendment, because she had found the original document in the Ember Court archive and had read it 3 times. Dorian's argument, if accepted, would require invalidating 2 treaties that currently protected his own trade routes. The council could certainly proceed if they wished. She would understand. The room was very quiet. Dorian stared at her. His expression was something she did not have a name for, somewhere between fury and something almost like recognition. He said nothing for a long time. Then he stood and thanked the council for their time and said that his legal team would need to review the documentation further before proceeding. He left the hall. He did not come back. That evening, Serena sat in the archive long after the candles had burned low. She was tired in a way that went deeper than her body, the kind of tired that comes after holding yourself together for a very long time. She heard Calum's footstep in the doorway. He told her it was over. The diplomatic pressure had collapsed. She was free, formally and completely, with safe passage recognized across every kingdom that had signed the accord. She nodded. She did not move. He came into the room and sat across from her, in the chair he had claimed over many weeks of morning conversations. He was quiet for a moment. Then he lowered himself from the chair and knelt on one knee beside the old archive table. She looked at him. He looked back at her. He told her he was not offering her a bond or a mark or a claim. He was not offering her a role she would be required to perform. He was offering her a seat beside him, one that was entirely hers by her own decision and no one else's, one she could leave at any time without consequence or condition. He wanted her to stay, not because it was tradition, not because it was expected, because 11 years was a long time to govern alone, and she was the first person who had made him feel less alone in all of that time. He offered her his crown, not to carry, to share. She was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the archive shelves around her, at the records she had sorted and the maps she had corrected, and the small corner of the world she had quietly made her own over the past weeks. She told him she had one condition. He waited. She told him she needed to keep her position in the archive. He laughed. It was not a careful laugh or a composed one. It was a real laugh, sudden and warm, the kind that changes a face completely. He said the archive was hers. She said yes. 1 year later, Serena stood at the window of the Great Hall and watched a delegation arriving from the wolf territories below. Dorian was gone. quietly removed by his own council, after a year of poor decisions. The new representatives were young and nervous-looking, here to discuss a trade agreement. She went down to meet them before the formal proceedings began. She found the youngest delegate standing alone near the entrance, gripping a leather folder too tightly. Serena stopped beside her and said that the meeting was not as difficult as it looked. She said that the council here was reasonable and the king was fair, and that if she knew her documentation, she had nothing to be afraid of. The young woman looked at her with surprised gratitude. Serena smiled and walked her inside. Above, on the landing overlooking the courtyard, Calum watched with his arms folded and that quiet expression on his face, the one that only appeared when he was watching her. Not pride exactly, though it was close. Something more like wonder, the kind that does not fade with time. He had offered her his crown. She had accepted it on her own terms. That, he had come to understand, was the only way it had ever been worth having.